All right, welcome to Professional Leadership. This video is going to be fairly short, but I just want to kind of give one kind of final principle that I think is important for professional leadership. And it's the concept of being yourself, right? And, it seems like that would be an easy thing. I mean, who better to be yourself than you, right? But I think that the trouble for many leaders, right, begins with their process of development, right? So when you're a new leader, your thought process, particularly if you're a driven leader and you're wanting to grow, is to begin to learn leadership principles, right? And so you may begin reading books, watching seminars, perhaps you get a mentor of some kind, you watch certain leaders. Perhaps if you're a pastor, you start watching other people preach, you start learning, maybe you go to college. And if you're not careful, in the learning phase, right, because you're trying to do it right, you will begin by default to start modeling the behavior that you see, right? When you're learning, the way to put it into practice, the way to grow, the way to develop, is you begin to model what other people are doing, right? The danger of that is then that you spend the rest of your life replicating, right, what you saw other people doing, right? And truly great leadership emerges when you take the next step, right? You go from learning to modeling to independence, where you're past trying to replicate the skills and the strengths that you saw in other people. You may adhere to many of those principles. You may have used many of their ideas as the foundation of your own thinking, but you begin as you grow, and if you're going to be a truly great leader, you have to do this, to separate yourself from the models that you've seen and to begin to allow the giftings and the strengths that the Holy Spirit has put in you to come to the forefront. It doesn't mean that you need to unlearn the things that you've done. It doesn't mean that you don't appreciate many of the people you've learned from and take some of the things that they've done. But this is the real danger for young leaders, is the modeling that you see in other people. If you're not careful, your definition of a good leader is when you can become like the people you were learning from, right? And that puts an unreasonable standard on you because you don't have the same gifts, the same strength, the same calling, the same empowerment from the Holy Spirit that those leaders did to do what God has called them to do, right? And so you want to take many of their principles, and this is really a key to leadership, is learning what can you take from them, right, in terms of something valuable to learn and to model without sacrificing who you are as a leader. And I think it's very easy for someone, let me give you an example of preaching. That's an area that I know well. If you're not careful, you will watch other preachers, and I've seen this a lot in a lot of people, and they will model and mimic even down to the delivery style of other preachers, right? And you see them, then they step into the pulpit, and they don't sound like themselves anymore. And all of a sudden, you hear them, they've adopted a style. They've adopted a preaching methodology, a voice, that's not even their voice, and you're thinking, what is that, 5 minutes ago, you didn't sound that way, you weren't acting that way, and then you get into the pulpit, and your demeanor changes, your voice changes. Often, now sometimes when the Holy Spirit moves in people, everybody has an excitability when the Holy Spirit is moving through them, and that's normal. So that's not what I'm talking about. But there are people who, because they've spent so much time watching other people preach, that when they get into the pulpit, their definition of success and preaching well is if they can preach like how that person was preaching. And they never develop their own voice. They never develop their own style. And they're always frustrated because they can't ever do it quite like that person was doing it, because that person has gifts and skill and a voice and a talent that this person wasn't born with. And so it leads to frustration. It leads to feeling like you're not as good as other pastors. And so what you want to do is have the ability to be your own speaker, right? Maybe take some of the skills, learn some things from them, but don't put them on such a pedestal that you spend your whole life trying to become like them, because then you never maximize what God gave you to do with your own skill set and your own calling. And in fact, that's one of the things that often attracts us to great leaders, is the fact that they were a little unique, right? And that's often what is the attracting force to other leaders and to other preachers, is that they have learned to use the voice that God gave them, to learn to use the skills and the calling and the uniqueness that God placed on the inside of them to accomplish the mission that He gave them. And when you see people doing that, there's something about that that draws you in. And so you want to make sure that in your learning from other people, that you are not trying to replicate them. You learn some things from them. You maybe watch some things that they do, and you take some of it, right, and filter it through what you do well, right? And don't make success to become like the ones you were modeling. Make success to be when you have maximized and are growing in being the leader that God called you to be, right? And to use the skills that He gave you, and to maximize those, because that's where you're really going to be great at, is your unique skills that God has given you. So learn from people, read all the books you can, watch other leaders, learn from their experience, but move on to the final stage, where you allow the Holy Spirit to take that beginning stage of learning and filter it through what He has created you to do and to be, right? And that's probably the most important lesson of them all, is let the Holy Spirit lead you into the calling He has for you, right?